specifically the AEC workplace. I'm Diana Kaufman, and I'm from CNS Companies, she, her, hers. Together with Kathy Metcalf of CPL, I chair the HR committee. This is my first time actually using my pronouns to let people know how I wish to be addressed. Today's session covers some complex topics, pronouns, acronyms, a whole load of other pieces of information about this topic. Some of this is complex in that it's not stuff we usually talk about openly and directly in such a manner, but our goal today is actually to tackle this head on and provide you with some educational material as well as takeaways that you can bring back to your organization. We hope you find this dialogue to be thought-provoking and that you find some time to reflect on this and bring that back to your organization. Before we get started, we have a few reminders for our participants. During the presentation, we ask that all participants keep your cameras off and your microphones off. Please pose questions for the panelists using the chat function. We'll try to answer questions as we go, as well as at the end. No question is dumb. We recognize that this is brand new information for many people, and you learn best by asking questions, so please ask questions. If you're having issues accessing the chat or you're having any technical difficulties, please email Natasha at acecny.org, and she'll get right on that for you. For those seeking SHRM and or HRCI credit, you will be emailed a certificate after the presentation if you indicated you needed credit, and you can use that to submit for your PDH hours. Today's presentation will be available on the members only section of the ACEC New York website, along with a recording of today's session, and this will be emailed to all attendees as well. And now I'd like to welcome our first featured speaker and today's facilitator, Talya Meyerowitz. Talya has been coaching leaders and teams for over a decade. She's the principal and founder of arespectfulworkplace.com and focuses her work on assisting organizations and their leaders in creating and sustaining respectful, values-based organizations. She works with her clients to bring organizational values to life and strategically navigate change and transition. She's a dynamic, sought-after speaker, and she's spoken at national and international leadership conferences. So Talya, please join us and have at it.
All right, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. My name is Talya Meyerowitz. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here to talk about my favorite topic, which is creating a respectful workplace. So just to tell you a little bit about who I am, I was raised by crazy South African hippies who have now turned into yuppies, who left South Africa because of apartheid. And I was raised in a way where this was our motto, that you speak to everyone the same way, regardless of who they are. And that was really my viewpoint. I was raised in a house that was tremendously open. All the things that you didn't typically call and tell your parents and your family about, we did. And that's my viewpoint when it comes to respect and how we really need to bring things to the table. This is my favorite quote out there, and I think is a really good place to set the stage for this morning's conversation, which is that we really don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. So I use the example, I think very few people on this call actually know me, but if I remind you of someone that you do not like, you are going to view me very differently than if I remind you of your best friend. Everything we see is through our own lens and based on who we are, how we were raised, and our experience. And it's really important to acknowledge that, especially when we're talking about topics related to diversity. Everything goes through our own viewpoint, and that's something that we really need to challenge. So I want to ask you all, I want you to think, is respect earned or given? So my husband, who worked for the Yankees for years and is a sports fanatic, I have watched every sports movie out there. And there's always some coach on the bench that's saying, you got to earn my respect. You got to earn it. I have yet to see a sports movie where that was not part of what happened. But I really want to challenge us today because I think we hear that respect needs to be earned. But I'm going to challenge us to say that really, when you think about it, respect should really be given. So I don't know most of the people on this call, and I have to tell you, you automatically have my respect. There's nothing you have to prove to me. And I think that's a little bit of a shift. Now, can respect be lost? Absolutely. And we all lose respect at different times based on who we are, based on our experience. But when it comes to respect, it really should be given freely. And it's absolutely not passive. I just like being horrible takes some effort, though I like to say for some people, they really make it look so easy. I think of respect as a very active choice and a very purposeful choice. You are not staying in the middle and being tolerant. And all of you who have joined us today clearly understand that it's active. We need to learn, we need to ask, we need to educate ourselves on issues that either involve us or are different from us. So if you look at research across the board, what employees most want, now we all want to be paid, but honestly, across the board, when you look at research for what people want from their leaders and their workplaces, money is usually about number 4. But what always rises to the top is people want to be respected and people want to be listened to. And if you think about how you feel as individuals, when you say something and someone gives what you say some value and they listen to you, that is really at the core of human need and what we all want in the workplace. And the outcomes when you're in, I work with groups across the country in all different industries. And you can really feel the difference because people who feel respected, they are happier, they are healthier, they like their jobs. If you think about it, if what you say matters, if who you are matters, that's going to make you have a lot more fulfillment and less distraction, right? There's focus. And we're going to talk about bringing your whole self to work and why respect is so important. I usually say, if you need another reason, what we're talking about today, whether we're talking about the topic today or race or effective communication or treating people individually, regardless, with respect, it's the right thing to do. I think we can all agree it's the right thing to do. But the reality is it's just way too expensive to ignore. And if there are people who are like, why do I have to say good morning? Or why is this stuff important? Well, let me tell you, when there is a culture of incivility or people aren't respected, everything changes. So you think about the teams you've been on where things gel really well, where people are working collaboratively, those teams are the most productive. When there's problems within teams, and I see this all the time, all of a sudden people call out a little bit more. They just, they don't want to deal with it. And what can happen if you start to hear that teams are not working together and being respectful of one another, really a reputation of an organization can come down, or a reputation of a specific sector. People don't want to go there. You can't get the best and the brightest. You can't keep them there. We all know the cost of replacing when people leave. So it's really important. And what's really fascinating, especially in the industry you're all in, is how much respect is correlated with creativity. So there was a study done out of the University of Florida where they took 2 groups by this guy, Dr. Amir Erez, and they took 2 groups. And one group came in and the person at the front desk looked up, greeted them kindly, gave them a smile, showed some interest. How are you today? You have to go down to room 3. Thank you so much for being here. Someone will be with you shortly. The second group came in, the person didn't look up, didn't, sort of said, sign here. Yeah, it's room 3. It's somewhere that way. Again, neither of these were extreme, right? Someone didn't punch someone in the face when they showed up or give them $1 million. Just simple respect as another human and simple kindness. And then they asked both groups, what could you do with the brick? And the group who, the person didn't look up and there wasn't engagement and there wasn't the respect of an individual and kindness, said, well, you can, build a wall, you can build a building, you can build a chimney, all true. What they found is that the group that was treated with respect and kindness said those things as well. And then they said, or you could put hair on the brick and get another brick and do a puppet show, or you could put wings on the brick and you could throw it and see who could throw the brick farther, and they found that the group that was treated with simple respect was 45% more creative. So it's not insignificant. So this is a tremendously intentional process of creating a respectful workplace. So I want you to think, and if you think of anything that I said today, this is something that I hope you'll take back. I'm happy to always continue the conversation with you or your teams. But we all see the world as we are. So how do you define a respectful workplace? And to give you an example, when I think of what I define as a respectful workplace, to me, I want there to be radical candor, which is when people challenge you and care about you equally. Conflict is part of a workplace. I think I'm not conflict averse. I think healthy conflict brings great solutions. People are listening to each other. They're accountable. There's appreciation for diversity, and people are kind and have empathy. But when you think about it, everyone has different ways they would fill in those circles and what rises to the top. So what makes up your respectful workplace? What about the people you work with every day? What would they put in those circles? And really, why don't we ask that? It is so incredibly simple. We'll say, good morning, how was your vacation? We don't say, by the way, we work together every day. What would be respectful to you? What's important to you? And we don't ask because it feels tremendously uncomfortable and it can feel strange, but really it is powerful. So if you think about one thing that I said today, think about going back and really speaking to the people about what makes up a respectful workplace. And I think what we'll learn today is that we need to ask and we need to challenge our assumptions. And by doing that, we are going to find more and more about the people that we work with and how to work best with them and be most respectful. And then we need to listen. And truly, 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 regardless of who I've worked with at whatever level, the best way to give someone respect is to listen to what they have to say and really to be present. So we've heard this our whole lives, right? This golden rule to treat others as you would like to be treated. But I'm going to really challenge that because I don't think it's that at all. I think it's to treat others as they would like to be treated. And it's a really small shift that is tremendously impactful. I joke, I'm a hugger, right? I like people to ask me about my weekend. I like to share, I like to talk, but the reality is not everyone's a hugger. And certainly in COVID and after our year, you can imagine how us huggers are feeling. We need to know what other people need and what they want and treat them the way. And the only way to do that is to ask. So there's opportunity for disruption. There's opportunity for us to look at, I've worked with companies and organizations and teams that are tremendously broken. And I've worked with some who are, best places to work. But the reality is we need to always keep an eye on this. And what's wonderful about it is that we have the opportunity to make workplaces incredibly respectful. They don't just happen. They take effort and they need to be built. And by you all being here today, you clearly care very much about building respectful workplaces. But the first place that we really need to start is looking at ourselves and really think about what biases we bring to the table. You know, the whole concept of unconscious bias is so fascinating. And how do you notice and challenge and change something that's unconscious? So I always tell people, and today, think about your reaction to what I'm saying. Think about your reaction to what the speakers are saying, and allow yourself to notice it and to challenge it and to look at it from a different angle, because that's how we become more self-aware and that's how we get better. I think for many of us, there's one way to do things, whether it's brushing your teeth with your right hand, but the reality is you can brush your teeth with your left hand too. So it's really looking at things from different ways and different viewpoints and remembering everyone's lens. So I think what helps people, what helps me when I'm in a situation that something feels strange or uncomfortable or it's out of my realm of knowledge, I really remember this. The reality is everyone has a battle that we know nothing about. And I think if you approach topics of sensitivity with curiosity and kindness, it can go a long way. So most of the work that I do is looking at every room that we've been in, at every company we've been in, right? There's an elephant in the room. There are things that are not being discussed. We are scared, and it can be from best intentions, right? We don't want to be offensive, and we want to make sure that we're being collaborative, or maybe there's conflict between people and everybody knows and is not saying anything. So I'm going to really suggest that part of creating a respectful workplace and part of the work I do and feel so passionately about is really taking those elephants in the room and bringing them to the table and talking about things in a real way so that we can learn and grow. Because I think with so many, whether it's race, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's conflict, whether it's problems, I think where we grow and where we learn is really to talk to each other as opposed to doing things, you know, there's always the meeting and then the meeting after the meeting. And I think the goal of a respectful workplace, I know that meeting after the meeting is incredibly juicy, but the real goal of a respectful workplace is to bring that meeting into the big one. So at the end of the day, I think we can all just work to be the people our dogs think we are. And I am so excited. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about a respectful workplace. I am so excited for the rest of today. I'm going to, with great honor, introduce Marcia Alvarado. She is a PE structural market leader at WGI, and she is going to take us into a deeper dive into today's topic. So Marcia, I'm going to give you the floor.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? Perfect. Awesome. Thanks for the thumbs up. Yes, my name is Marcia Alvarado. I use she, her pronouns. I do work as a structural market leader, background in structural engineering for buildings here at WGI. And I also serve our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, leading that committee for WGI and helping out our organization with our initiatives here at the company. Today, you know, before we get into detailed conversation about very complicated topics and topics that people may be uncomfortable hearing or seeing, we wanted to take the opportunity to conversate a little bit about language. Leading on Talya's idea of respect, my opinion is that, the use of language is ever evolving, just like everything else in the world, whether it's designing, people, our communities are always evolving. And I think, recognizing that the use of language is constantly evolving is a part of that. And being in the knowledge, in the know, and being able to understand where the language is at and how it's grown, I think is very important when we talk about respect within the workplace. So I'm going to do a short segment here, kind of just more of a Wikipedia session. One of the things that has been around for a while, it's a couple of versions of this, is the genderbread person. As you can see on the screen, one of these ideas that may not be as clear to people is the idea that gender identity does not equate gender expression. Who you are, who you are internally and how you identify is something completely different than maybe how you express yourself to the world, which is also definitely different from, the sexual orientation, which, as this session is about navigating the LGBTQ plus, in our industry. And so just having some of this kind of knowledge of that, I identify as a female. Most of my gender expression is very masculine in nature, the way that people view me, right? And my sexual orientation, I identify as a lesbian. Now, some of that information may be, in your opinion, may not be, prevalent to the work that I'm supposed to be doing at my job. But the reality is every human being has a different story. Every human being has a different perception of how they grew up, as Talya was mentioning, and how we've evolved. And so, the idea of coming back to understanding an individual and maybe how they present themselves to the world, you can create a better partnership, a better relationship with your team, your management, up and down, if you have the level of understanding and respect of where, each individual is coming from. So, the gender identity is how an individual feels mentally on the inside, and how they express themselves to the world is something completely different. And then essentially, their sex assigned at birth is typically, a biological clarification, and then essentially we get into, the labels that we've been using in the current time in terms of who we're sexually attracted to, and how we're romantically attracted to them. And so this kind of idea in terms of, your internal identity versus who you're attracted to versus how you express yourself to the world, these are all very different facets. And if you can understand the concept of how they can be different, how maybe your perception of looking at someone that may be more masculine presenting but doesn't identify as a male could be real. And that could be through clothing, it could be through mannerisms, it could be through many different facets. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're attracted to, the same sex or the opposite sex based on what your preconceived notions are. So, so this is pretty much kind of a backstory in terms of, understanding this concept that will help you to kind of dig deeper into understanding, some of these other facets. Now we're going to go through a list of kind of terminology, and some of it may be obvious to the group and some of it may not be. And so we're just trying to create a level playing field. So when we get into our panel discussion with all of the great speakers that are on today, the use of language, hopefully we can have a baseline. This is a list of definitions. We're going to go through some in a little bit more detail, but essentially, as Diana mentioned, this will be presented to you so you can have this as like a place to kind of use as reference. And we just wanted to throw in here, the original pride flag or rainbow flag was actually designed by Gilbert Baker back in 1978. It actually had 8 colors. It's actually been, modified to the traditional 6, starting from red, orange, yellow, green, purple, and blue. Probably from more of a manufacturing point of view where, the use of color and fabrics are highly accessible. You've seen these flags to represent a celebration of the community, also a sign of social justice, and many other forms in terms of to express at being a part of the community, but also being a supportive ally. When it comes to terminology, I've always had many conversations with many different individuals, and the use of these type of categories or labels are help each individual try to identify and create some sense of self. So when it comes to the labels, I know that sometimes people get confused, but essentially, it's an evolving door, right? And we've seen some of these, the LGBT has been something that's been around for a while, Q, QIA, PP, and other labels that have been generated over time to help people essentially find a sense of self. So, somebody that may not be aware of any of these may not understand the reasoning. I think that when you think about, some of these, it's essentially a sense of creating a sense of self for each individual person. And when they really try to get to know themselves and really try to understand themselves. So when I, not understanding why there's labels or why do we need to talk about these things, I would have to say my response is that each individual has their own journey, and sometimes the journey is not as same as you, and sometimes using our language is a way to help formulate where we're going or who we are and what we're looking for in the world around us. So cisgender and cis is a term used for someone who exclusively identifies as their sex assigned at birth. So when you're, see somebody walking down the street, or essentially someone that appears to be male in your mind or appears to be female, someone who actually identifies as male and is assigned sex male at birth, is someone that we would call a cisgendered human being. The L is for lesbian. It is a female identified person who is attracted romantically, physically, or emotionally to another female identified person. Gay, G is for gay, used to essentially enduring physical, romantic, and emotional attractions to people of the same sex. The word gay has kind of been used in to cover, kind of an umbrella, whether it's same sex with male or female. The B in LGBT is for bisexual. So this is a person who has the capacity to form an enduring physical and romantic emotional attraction to those of the same gender or those of another gender.
Where's that? Cat? Is that a cat?
So here's another little learning moment. Now, I think I covered it, but the current Pride flag has 6 colors. It's typically starting from the top, the red, and like I said, used for a representation of the community, but then also a sign of support for our allies. And there's the colors, red for life, orange for healing, yellow is for sunlight, green is for nature, blue is for harmony, and purple is for spirit. Going back to the terminology, Q in the LGBTQ is for queer. An adjective used by some people, particularly in the younger generation in today's world, where the sexual orientation is not exclusively heterosexual. I think that it's very important that our culture and the people that use the language understand that words can change over time. When I'm communicating and speaking to people, sometimes the word queer, it can be a negative trigger for someone maybe from the early 50s or 60s. But what I try to think about is where they're coming from and try to use the language that they can understand. The younger generation has kind of embraced and redefined queer in a matter of speaking to kind of be a little bit more liberating and really essentially cover all the spectrum. So if you hear someone using, queer identified individual, or there's a queer event, like typically it kind of is a broader umbrella of the LGBTQ plus community. And a lot of our younger generation use this and have, like I said, re-embrace the word and has a more positive impact when they're communicating to family, friends, and so forth. The term, the I stands for intersex. This is an umbrella term describing people born with a reproductive or sexual anatomy pattern that can be classified typically as male or female. So, previously, maybe you've heard the word hermaphrodite being used in the past. It's kind of outdated, and it's always been, like I said, may have been a medical term at one point, but became a very derogatory term. So, intersex essentially describes that scenario and its preferred use now in today's conversations. The A stands for asexual, and this is someone who does not experience sexual attraction. A person can also be romantic, aromantic, meaning they do not experience romantic attraction. The P stands for pansexual, and is capable of being attracted to many genders. Sometimes the term omnisexual is used in the same manner. I would have to say that, bisexual and pansexual I've heard it been used somewhat interchangeably, but essentially, a pansexual person really just looks at the human being, in a matter of speaking, and can be attracted to, any human being in any of its form of any gender. So this is just kind of where the terminology falls. Like I said, like the use of language changes over time. So, you never can feel like you're up to game or up to par with the language. It is evolving, it is changing, but the best thing about when you're in a dynamic with other humans and you're not in the know, don't feel as if this is, you should be. I think that, we're always learning, we're always changing. And so, having the courage to ask somebody that you trust or somebody that you've built a relationship with is one of the best ways that you can help educate yourself and just feel comfortable having some of these just basic conversations. So just for an example, and someone is transitioning, the sex change or sex change operation typically is things that we don't, kind of use to communicate. And the word transitioning is a better, is the term that the transgender people are used to, are kind of more of an accepting and an acknowledging term. Gender pronouns. This has come up in many different facets in the workplace, and there's many reasons why I think they can be important. At the end of the day, I think it goes back to respect, right? It goes back to, how you refer somebody, whether it's, a salutation or just, you're a professional engineer, giving them that sign of respect, saying, I see you, and is kind of where I kind of bring back gender pronouns. Using she, her for myself is very helpful for my clients, my colleagues, so that, if I am presenting or if I show up in a meeting, like they clearly have been given the pronoun that I use, and there's no ambiguity. Okay, we're gonna skip that word, but you know where I was going with that. So that they can clearly, understand that, hey, here's myself. I know who myself is, and you can identify me in this way. And so, at the end of the day, there's a lot of different pronouns that have been generated to, create a sense of self. And I would just ask that, be open-minded in terms of the way that we communicate, the way that we train. I think the use of they, them is going to be incorporated in so much more of our information and of our training, just to avoid the idea that we're going to exclude anybody. And it takes practice. Sometimes, I still struggle with, using the right pronoun for some of my close friends that have maybe transitioned, because I've come to know them as one human being when I first meet them, and then they've transitioned and I have to kind of use their name. That's usually one of the best ways that you can catch yourself, is to use people's name, because the name is a very individualistic characteristic about them, and you'll never go wrong, essentially. So little tips and tricks that I do to even help myself as I navigate this world. And then this is another little graphic to kind of help understand a little bit in terms of the identity, the gender identity the gender expression, sex at birth, and who's someone physically attracted to and someone who's emotionally attracted to. And, this concept is something that I think we could have a whole nother 4-hour discussion on. But I think if you start speaking and hearing some of the things that we're going to have today, you're going to understand a little bit more about, the conversation that we're going to have, and have a better sense of where somebody's coming from, and how we can create a more inclusive environment by just acknowledging that this exists, and that each human being that's in your office, that's in your family, that's in your public life, has these sense, and each person thinks about these things in a different way, and there's so many stories to share. I think Talya did a great job. I personally have gone through this journey within the last 10 years for myself, in terms of I knew who I was, Marcia, but understanding how I can present myself to the world and understanding these facets really helps me to understand each individual's emotional side, and how they express themselves, and how they make decisions, and how they can kind of navigate in the world, and feel comfortable with who they are, if they can clearly define in themselves the things. And this is not an easy task. I think the LGBTQ community is a very strong community that has had to do a lot of soul searching. I think that a lot of individuals, regardless if you're part of the community or not, should go through the same level of soul searching. And I think that that's really important for you as a human, for you to be able to be successful, family, work, and so forth. And so just really knowing yourself is where this really comes down. And I think a lot of what the LGBTQ plus community does is they do a lot of this in terms of understanding who they are and how they want to navigate in the world. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Talya. Yay, thanks for the handshake, or claps.
All right, that was amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm going to start today by introducing our panel. You have met Marcia, so I'm going to go one by one, and before we get into the questions, so if Seth, Grady, and Michelle, if you can all put your cameras on. So I'm going to start by introducing Seth Gamble. Seth is a knowledge manager at Arup, which I had to make sure I didn't say Arup. Seth, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Talya. Yes, it is Arup. You did well. My name is Seth Gamble. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a knowledge manager and marketing coordinator inside of Arup, and I've been with the firm for 8+ years now. For those of you that don't know what knowledge management is, we can talk about that another time and why it needs to be managed. But I also want to do a little plug that I'm also a founding member of Build Out Alliance, which is a local New York City-based nonprofit that is looking to advocate for and promote and advance the issues and initiatives for LGBTQ people working inside of the building, design, and construction industry. So I'm thrilled to be here today to speak with you all.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Seth. I now would like to introduce Grady Schutt, who we agree has the coolest background with the bikes and the artwork. So Grady is a senior VDC engineer at VIATechnik LLC in New York. Grady, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hi. Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm super excited to be here today. Thanks for the introduction, Talya. My name is Grady Schutt. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a Midwest transplant, proudly maladjusted to New York City. I have a passion for all things BIM. As Talya said, I'm a senior VDC engineer at VIATechnik, and my goal is to truly leverage technology in the AEC industry to help construction professionals like yourself. As a 25-year-old who is just getting started in my career, I think I bring a valuable perspective on these topics, and I really hope to be a strong, positive voice for the younger generation in the construction industry.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Grady. And I'm going to introduce Michelle Phillips. Michelle is a principal at Jackson Lewis P.C. Michelle, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, I grew up in a pink room and did not like that. So I now like all things blue. Everything about me is blue, from my phone to the case that I keep my documents in. In addition to that, I'm an attorney and I work at Jackson Lewis. I'm a partner there, and I focus on employment law representing management, and specifically around harassment and discrimination. I subspecialize in sexual harassment, as well as LGBTQ issues. I also focus, and I work with companies when they either get accused of discrimination, and also in gender transitions. I'm often brought in to do training and to work with companies on that transition, and I feel lucky every day to do the work that I do.
Wonderful. All right, so we're going to get started with some questions. Michelle, I'm going to have you and your blue go first. You're an employment attorney, and you know firsthand actions employers can undertake to assist employees who are going through gender transition. So can you tell us a little bit about this? Can you share some examples with us, please?
Well, so this is something I do every day, but for the employer, it's often the first time they're dealing with it. So when this started to begin in the workplace, like it's beginning in people's lives for all of time, but as it's become more popular in the workplace, right? Like that's amazing. You're talking about diversity and inclusion and creating an environment in which people feel comfortable bringing their whole selves. So it's amazing that people are actually taking that courageous step, given how families react, religious institutions, the fact that people feel comfortable enough to take this, knowing that in 27 out of 50 states, it is legal to fire someone based on gender identity. And only in 23 states is that not, can you actually pursue a legal action on the state level, right? And but for the Bostic decision, which is a Supreme Court case, from June 15th of last year on a federal level where you can pursue an action. So the question is, do you want to be proactive or do you want to be reactive as an employer? So either I get involved either way. Either I get involved and some HR professional is panicked and they're like, oh my God, what do I do? And I'm like, okay, calm down. This is like, we will get through this. We will talk about a gender transition plan. I will prepare talking points for you. I actually tell them I will prepare idiot-proof talking points for you. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean like, because they're like, I don't know, like well-intentioned people, heads of companies, like, lawyers, HR professionals, managers, want to do the right thing more today than in the past, but they don't have the language to do it. So I help them with the language, with the law, and we sort of work backwards. So the first thing is it's almost like an ADA accommodation issue, although it's not necessarily a disability. But we talk about, okay, so we're here to support you, so what's going to be your go live date, and let's work backwards from that. So what's going to be the staff communication in advance? Let's talk about what are your pronouns, your name that you want to be called. What do we need to do with the HRIS system in advance of that? What training do we want to do? Who's the appropriate group? What's going to be the transgender employee's role in that training? Do they want to make an announcement? Do they want me as a trainer often doing that to say something on their behalf? And really just start the conversation. Let's deal with the restroom issue, which for some reason, we'll talk about that in a moment, but that becomes, unfortunately, a big issue. Are you going to take a leave of absence? So those are some of the things that we talk about as part of the conversation.
Thank you. And Seth, do you want to tell us a little bit about the toolkit that you have and created?
Yes, so Arup is one of the many things that I love about Arup is that we have had several employees go through transitions on the workplace, and because of that and because of the work that our employee resource group has done, we actually developed a gender transition toolkit, which goes through a lot of the things that Michelle was just talking about, working backwards and giving the employee the resources that they need to embark upon a transition, telling them giving them the kind of the contact list of who do they need to talk to, what are the steps to take. So it's a really fantastic resource that we have available to all staff around the globe, that should they be considering a transition, it is available to them and helps guide them along the way. So we're really, really proud of the work that our team has done. And I won't tell her story, but one of our employees transitioned many years ago before it was even kind of current issue. And so we learned a lot of lessons during that process, and she helps drive the development of this transition toolkit.
Seth, and am I right that you're willing to share that with people who are interested?
Yes, there's a few little Arup specific things we have to take out of it, but I'm happy to share after this.
Wonderful. So there's a lot of information out there, and what I find is that people are so willing to share in the hopes of inclusive workplaces being everywhere. So we're going to hop around a little bit. I want to go to Grady. Grady, what do you think, when you look at the importance of creating inclusive workplaces and the importance of talking about these issues? You're part of the younger generation. So what do you think the younger generation is looking for in a company that makes this even more important?
Yeah. What I honestly think the younger generation wants, when they're just getting started on their job search and they're browsing through different companies, we're really starting to kind of consider more than just, what it is you're going to be doing at work. The younger generation wants a healthy, understanding, happy, upbeat, and like a genuine company work culture. And I think this really does start with inclusivity, like across the board, because, not only when you feel included, do you have more positive outlook on work life, but when you start to see your coworkers, your friends, your colleagues being included, it really starts to set a precedent. And I think it's really what brings teams together. So specifically today, we're talking about respecting people's gender identities and their sexual orientation. But, this is really just one part of the full picture, because when you genuinely respect people for their individuality, you create a cultivating work environment, which in result improves company productivity. Not only this, but you'll start to attract new talent, and even better, you'll increase your employee retention. Company culture is like a sort of gravity to it, and the healthier that culture is, the stronger the pull. I always kind of like to think of it as like when you see a line outside of a restaurant, you think to yourself, oh my gosh, why are those people waiting in line for this restaurant? But also, you think to yourself, wow, that must be good. There's more of a demand for it. So I think the younger generation they're going beyond just, what it is, the type of work. There's so many options for employment now that we're really starting to get down to what's important to us.
Thanks. Absolutely. Well, especially in New York, you see a line out of a restaurant and you think, well, can't I just go next door? But somehow you find yourself waiting. So true. Seth, so just building on that, why is this better for business? So we know that the younger generation, what the younger generation is looking for, but why in general is creating an inclusive environment really better for business overall?
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about it in your introduction, and I think Grady hit on it a little bit too, that it generally helps the bottom line because you're able to bring your whole self to work. You don't have to think about anything else that might be on your brain. You're there for the specific task at hand, which is to be part of a workplace and to drive some deliverables. And what I think people often forget is when you're thinking about your identity or how you express yourself in a workplace, your brain gets divided. You get to split it around. You have to ask the question, who am I here? How am I presenting? What are people thinking about me? And by having an inclusive workplace, you kind of get to free up that brain space. You don't have to have those questions running through your brain all the time because you just get to be, which means you get to focus. You get to drive exactly what it is that you're there to do. That work is work, and you don't have to constantly question and all these other things. So it really just has like a nice trickle down effect because the more focus you have, the more deliverables you're able to to work through, and then it helps with the business overall. And it just really creates a better environment all around.
And Marcia, I want to build on that because maybe you could say a little bit about bringing your whole self to work, but you've shared with us, and if you would share with everyone here today, I know that with that you make adjustments. So tell me how you feel you're adjusting in your daily life as a part of the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, so this is something that comes up, not often, because I've been I've been out and I've been presenting in a very masculine way for the last 16 years. I started my career in New York City, so that was a healthy start. It was easier, I think, in that environment even 16 years ago. But, there was always things that you learn as a young person or as you're growing in a workplace or a new culture, a new company. You're starting to recognize the areas and things that, people are receptive to. And so it happens in my everyday life. Some people don't realize that when I wake up in the morning, my routine starts at looking at my calendar, right? With just like a lot of other professionals and who they're going to be interacting with that day, what type of preparation is going to be needed for each meeting, whether it's a client, whether it's a team leader, or whether it's staff. And really understanding, how I'm going to be perceived. How am I going to get my point across? How is somebody going to be able to listen to the words that I have from the technical side of my business and what I'm trying to present? If they're focused, if there's, like Seth said, if their mind is divided of me being in a meeting, let's just say with the Army Corps of Engineers, and half the people in the room are trying to figure out my gender identity and through my expression and through the way I'm talking and my gesturing, then it's confusing and it takes away from the content of what I'm trying to do, right? So there's always adjustments that I make. When I meet a brand new client, even though I wear suits and dress shirts and ties, I never wear a tie when I'm meeting somebody for the first time. The tie is a very symbolic fashion statement, right? You are commanding presence, and in presentations, it's something that you want to make sure that the room is focusing on you, which is one of the main reasons why a lot of male-identified human beings wear the tie in those situations. But when you're meeting somebody new that doesn't know you, that doesn't know, the Marcia, the Alvarado experience, the world that I live in, right? I need to be able to gain some trust. And so I remove that barrier to try to create that trust. Now, maybe the second and third meeting after we get to know each other, we're working together, like I can pretty much present my whole self to them in a way that, it's a gradual progression. This is the way that I've been successful personally in my career. And so it's not something that people think about, using the restroom, as Michelle mentioned, I'm very thoughtful. I think I've created, in my daily life where I avoid using the restroom if possible in very public places. It's not something that is a medical, like I'm like literally holding it and like, oh, I gotta, like if I have to go, I'm going, like guys. But the reality is I think I've naturally created an opportunity where like if I'm out in a very public, like the state fair, and I have like, I'm just not gonna go to the bathroom. Like, first of all, porta potties, ew, why would you do that? Anyway, so, but the reality is I've made so many adjustments over my life that now, sometimes I forget how many adjustments I've made throughout the day or things that I do, to be able to gain people's trust, to be a professional in this business and to be able to do really good work and get people to, people want to work with people they like. And if you can gain that trust value, this is, leadership 101, right? Like people are going to want to give you work versus the next guy if they like working with you. And it's about building that trust. And I found a way to do it in my own way. And I think each individual should really, consider not that you're changing who you are for the world that you're living in or working in, but really being thoughtful about, how to gain people's trust in a real way that you can be successful. And it's going to look different for every human being. Whether you're, a lesbian that's very feminine identified, there's females that I would talk to that, I actually have an advantage because I'm masculine presenting in a male dominated industry. Versus if I was showing up in a dress, there's already those preconceived notions about this human being in a room, maybe with all men. So, but I use that to my advantage. I use that to gain people's trust and to help educate. And that's what I feel like I've been doing for many years. And now, being here at WGI, I feel like I have an opportunity to help the organization, but also help our industry, which I've been very thankful for.
When you spoke about that earlier, for so many of us, a basic need like going to the restroom, I have to be honest, I just go. And when you think about a respectful workplace and you think about our lens and how we all see the world, just having some real genuine empathy that anyone for such a basic need would really even have to think about that. And when you talk about bringing your whole self to work, right? If someone's whole self is there, then perhaps that can remove that stress in the moment, right? Within, your workplace, your home, that really shouldn't even be a part of the equation. So Michelle, you've done a lot of stuff with the bathroom dilemma. Can you help us out a little bit to understand the best way to handle this, to make it inclusive and start removing barriers?
Well, I can't believe, in all seriousness, how much time I talk about this issue. Like it's just, and I think the last time we talked about this in one of the prep calls, like I kind of made fun of it, and it's like it's not a joke. Like I'm okay with someone being trans. I'm okay with someone being gender non-binary. They can dress however they want, but I just don't want to be in the restroom with them. So is that inclusive? Really? Right? Is that respectful? Really? So when I'm delivering a training, I can't even, if I'm asked 20 questions, 10 of them will be about the restroom. Every time. And so when I was talking before about being proactive or reactive, it's not about only not being not unlawful, right? Because inclusion and diversity is beyond that. It's more expansive than that. And if you're really creating an environment where people can bring their best or whole selves to the workplace, it's not about complying with the OSHA regulation, which says that restroom usage is based on consistent gender presentation. So the first thing I do is level set the employer with what is the law in this area. And the law is very clear in this area. Equal access to the restroom. No one person's rights are greater than any, no one person's rights trump anyone else's rights. Everyone has equal access to the restroom. Now, you can't impose your rights over someone else. So you could choose to be in the restroom. You could choose not to be in the restroom, right? We're not going to force you in the restroom with someone else. And as long as you graciously, like you could go in the restroom, you could not like someone, and as long as you graciously exit the restroom, you don't go like, oh, and you're right, you can't be like snotty or disrespectful or harassing when you leave the, right? You can't be like, oh, like that you can't do. But you could choose politely to either not go in or to exit in a graceful way. But what we're not going to do, right, because Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas said separate is inherently unequal. So we're not going to shun, because people will say, well, how about we let the transgender person use a single stall? Well, how about we let you use another bathroom, right? Because separating the person is not treating them equally, is not treating them fairly. Now, there was a time earlier on where often the person in transition did want to do that for a limited period. And people would, like, they say, we want to put locks on the bathrooms now. I'm like, why? Why now, all of a sudden, do you want to put locks on the bathrooms? Well, we're concerned about privacy. Whose privacy are we concerned about? Is there some rush to the restroom now all of a sudden? If people are invading the restroom, that all of a sudden now you want to put lock, right? So we have to really put everything in a context. And then, so that's from a legal perspective. Now let's look at it from what I call the twin fears of the restroom. And by the way, this is just an interesting thing on the power dynamic, and and where we see the issue most is when someone is transitioning from where they are assigned male at birth and they transition to female. We see much less dissent when someone is transitioning where they were assigned female at birth and they are transitioning to, and I'm not talking about gender non-binary, and that's not part of this theory that I have. And I think it has to do with power and privilege. So if someone is transitioning from from initially being assigned a male gender at birth to female, they can't cover as well. They can cover, but they can't pass as well. So it's evident when they go to use the women's restroom. And so the women in the restroom experience, and the men on behalf of the women, and they all of a sudden now like get upset on behalf of the women in the restroom. And they have two fears. One is that who they perceive as a male, which is not the case, in the restroom is going to come on to the women in the restroom, right? Because they think because they're confounding sexual orientation and gender identity. And just because someone transitions in their gender doesn't necessarily, it may mean that their orientation changes, but it may not. And the second thing is that they're going to attack the person. There's a fear of physical violence. And I'm going to just say this, I'm not the only one, of course, doing this work. I don't know of a single incident where someone has transitioned and then attacked cisgender females in the women's restroom. I'm not saying I know everything going on, but I think I would have heard of it. It's literally not in the country, not in the world, but you know what? Stereotypes and deeply held fears. It doesn't matter if I tell you statistically, it is these deeply ingrained biases, both conscious and unconscious. And that's what we have to unpack. And that's all the work that all of us do on this panel is so important.
Thank you. Sometimes, you think of these really basic functions that become really unnecessarily complicated. And I think this is where we really need to challenge biases, conscious and unconscious, because really, and I'm so glad you shared that you haven't heard of a case, people just want to go to the bathroom. But there is a hard side and a difficult side. And Grady wrote an unbelievable article looking at the bullying side. What happens when people come in and have biases and have preconceptions of there only being one way, and some really upsetting statistics. So Grady, do you want to tell us a little bit about your piece and what you found?
Yeah, so my article is called Building Pride, a reflection on LGBTQ rights in the construction industry. And in my article, I talk about mental health and how it's really the unseen danger on a job site. And, from an occupational health and safety perspective, I think we can all agree that job sites are very dangerous work environments, but people often forget, about our mental health. Every day the queer people face a stigma that creates a self-impaired image and a high stress level that results in mental health problems. We talked about this many times today, but the need to conceal one's identity can be one of the greatest sources of stress an individual might experience. So what I go into in my article is talking about that stigma. And, it's not surprising that the CDC actually reported last year that the construction workers unfortunately have the nation's highest rates of suicide. Few jobs are more collaborative than construction work, and so a sense of inclusion is really vital for that collaboration of work. Yet we still overhear the term gay as an insult in the workplace, or jokes based on sexual orientation or gender identity. And this stuff is all still too common. So, careers in the construction industry require apprenticeships, on-job training, lots of physical demand. Getting into this line of work is an active choice, yet more often we see it as a last resort. And again, going back to like the younger generation, young people are losing interest in the trades at the very time when demand for skilled labor is growing. And it's these harmful stereotypes that we have in the construction industry, associated with this type of work. And it's getting harder to close the gap for the demand of what employment is needed for skilled trades workers. If construction employers want to collaborate with the best in the industry, we should really encourage everyone to see and look at others by their skills, their motivation, their teamwork, not someone's gender identity or sexual orientation, because that really doesn't define how someone performs at work, But I can share that article link as well. I think everybody should read that.
Right, and this goes back to, again, all this stuff is the right thing to do, but it also impacts business. So for people who really struggle with the buy-in, based on their biases, I think the fact that it's the kind, humane thing to do to be inclusive and be caring and have respectful cultures, it also affects the bottom line. And Seth, I want you to tell me a little bit about the employee resource group you have and what people can do if their organizations don't have one or don't have enough people. Tell us a little bit about that as a good way to make cultures a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very proud to be a member of our employee resource group for LGBTQ people inside of Arup. It's called Connect Out. And thankfully, Arup is a global organization. We've had employee resource groups around the globe that we've been able to learn from and lean on as needed, as we've been establishing a more America-centric organization and group. But not everybody has that resource available to them, let alone, I know Grady shared with us, I think he's one of the only queer people in his firm potentially. So it's hard to establish an employee resource group when you're an employee resource group of one. And I think one of the best things that people can do inside of this industry is to lean on everybody, learn from those that are around you. The AEC industry isn't huge. And so we should focus on building each other up, helping to make the industry as a whole more inclusive. And when a firm doesn't have the capacity to support a single person or an ERG on their own, you can reach out to another firm and say, like, what have you done? How have you helped support this community or this group? And what are the lessons learned that you can share? It's really great, even if that firm then that you reach out to even does have an ERG, so that you can learn specifically from what they've done. And another shameless plug, there are other groups out there that are working on this. They're trying to make the industry a little bit more inclusive. So my group, Build Out Alliance, we are really focused on establishing that. And we came together over happy hour in 2017. We just recognized that there were a number of us, a number of our individual employee resource groups, as well as just individuals from other firms that didn't have the same representation. So we thought, hey, there's something here. Let's solidify this. Let's try and be more proactive inside of this industry. Let's make some positive changes. So we worked really hard and diligently over the span of a year and a half to not only show ourselves in New York City pride, but also establish ourselves as a nonprofit. And since then, we've been continually growing, and we've just been working to try and provide the resources that many of our individual ERGs have to a wider audience, whether that's mentorship, whether that's promoting leadership roles, whether that's just sharing stories. One of the things that we've kind of touched on all throughout this conversation this morning is that coming out is an ongoing process. It has to happen all the time for each one of us. Every day we wake up and we say, how am I going to present myself? How am I going to engage? How am I going to make those little adjustments that Marcia talked about? It's a constant process. And so by helping share stories, helping highlight individuals inside of the industry that are part of the LGBTQ community that maybe you wouldn't necessarily know right off the bat, it helped make the industry as a whole more inclusive. So That's what I would recommend, is that organizations that don't have an ERG, that can't support their own, just reach out, find another that does, make connections, learn lessons, share, just be willing to learn and grow as you need to.
You know, you mentioned sharing stories. I mean, I think in general, we don't share our stories enough, right? We know holistically that teams that work best together and organizations that work best together are people who really know each other. You know, the best teams, and that doesn't mean reading Dear Diary, but it means really people who take interest in each other, care about each other. And I find often a lot of the work I do, or part of the work I do, is getting people to tell each other our stories, because that just makes for better workplaces. So I want to ask Michelle, what type of training do you recommend? What can businesses and people listening on the line, what do you think they should look at for training on sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression? What should people do?
Well, one way it comes up in certain states, New York being one of them, there's required sexual harassment training as of the last 2 or 3 years. And a component of that training that I always include is LGBTQ plus harassment and discrimination. But separate and apart from that piece of another training, there should be designated training focused on LGBTQ plus issues. And that would include some of the terminology that Marcia covered in the beginning, but it also would include how the company's policies play into all of that. So for example, the company has 0 tolerance for harassment and discrimination, and providing people examples of that. So for confidentiality around medical information of the person who's transitioning, not asking inappropriate questions like, oh, are you gonna cut it off? Are you gonna grow a pair of? All of the things that I've heard. Not misgendering someone, calling someone the wrong pronouns. I'm not talking about accidentally mistakenly calling someone the wrong pronoun initially, but willfully, consciously calling someone the wrong pronouns, not apologizing, not being respectful, whispering, gossiping. Oh, what's going to happen with the family? Oh my God, is the wife going to stay with the person? Are they going to, like all of this gossiping about the person that's just, obviously not appropriate. The religious issue, this often comes up a lot. Someone asked in the chat function, how do we balance sincerely held religious beliefs along with LGBTQ rights? And there's definitely case law on that, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed. There's a distinction between having, again, I was talking before about not imposing rights in terms of the restroom, but more generically, you have the right to your religious beliefs, you have the right to your political beliefs, you have the right to your ethical and moral beliefs. You do not have the right to impose those beliefs on someone else. So earlier on, for example, I had someone who was in IT. I think that might be knowledge management, although I'm not sure exactly, Seth. A piece of it, maybe. But so a small piece. Okay, I got it. But this person had said, I don't object to that person's lifestyle. I don't object to that person's choice, but I don't want to sit near them. So can you transfer them so I don't have to look at them? I'm like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen, right? Like, I mean, did they say something, or is it just their being that you object to? Well, according to my religious beliefs, I had someone say in a training, I'm a minister, and on Sunday, I deliver sermons. And part of my sermons is that being gay is you're a sinner and that you need to repent and be saved. Is that going to be a problem for me in the workplace? Because they record my sermons and they're up on Facebook. I'm like, yeah, that could be a problem for you in the workplace. Yep. You're a manager. You need to lead by example. And if you're recording, I'm not telling you what to do in the privacy of your religious institution. But if that's up on Facebook and people from work listen to your sermons because you're on Facebook, that could be a problem for you in the workplace. So there's distinctions that need to be made, and we need to look at every situation. Every situation's unique. But that's an important part of training. Privacy considerations, doing workshops, running people through different scenarios, engaging with people one-on-one, not just lecturing at people. So again, I don't want to take up too much time, but teaching managers to lead by example, to set the tone in the workplace, that everything they say, everything they do sends a message. Everything they don't say, everything they don't do sends a message. In fact, I think what people don't say and don't do, what they don't stop, where they laugh, where they let something go by, sends more of a message than the words that come out of their mouth.
Right. I do a lot on, if you look at communication, right, it's made up of 3 things: your words, your body language, and your tone. And if you look at what's the percentage of communication that's words, it's 7%.
Wow.
Right? It's only 7%. So that doesn't mean the words don't matter, because it's what you say matters, but how you say it and what your body language shows. And now, you know, many of us are in this virtual world, in this weird year we've had. What I like to say is, right, we can see people's faces. I mean, it's really interesting. You can see what people are not saying. Mm-hmm. So Marcia, I want to ask you, as people are trying to be respectful and people want to make sure around pronouns or their language, how do people navigate if they've made a mistake, or if they don't know, should they ask? What's your opinion on this related to pronouns, or this area in general? How can people be the most respectful?
Yeah, no, I think that, you know, as I said before, we're all learning, including myself. And one of the best ways that, you know, if you're unsure or if it's not clearly defined, like in an email signature, you know, asking someone's pronouns is a sign of respect in this day and age, in my opinion. So, you know, knowing like, hey, before we get going on this meeting, can you just please verify your pronouns so that I make sure that I, you know, and then if the mistake has happened, to not belabor it, you know. I have colleagues and friends that use they, them, and sometimes I make a mistake and I just like, and then I correct myself, oh, I'm sorry, they, them, you know, they, and then I move on. And so one of the best ways, you know, it is very a vulnerable state that, like, as soon as you make a mistake and you realize that you're in this very vulnerable, scared little, like, oh no, I just offended. But if you just kind of make the acknowledgement, you know, correct yourself, and then move on with the meeting, it sets a precedence and it sets a tone that it's okay to make mistakes. You know, it's okay to make honest mistakes. Obviously, if you are choosing to not use the pronoun that they have asked you to, and you're doing it on purpose, that's a different story. But when you're in this world of navigating and not understanding, and be willing more to listen and to hear, I think that, you know, it takes practice. Like I said, I've defaulted to using people's names. Sometimes you can't mess it up. I mean, you can mess up someone's name, because if you don't know how to pronounce it, then that's, you know, I had a last name that was like, you know, 15 syllables long one time, and it was a supervisor, and I made it a point to try to learn his name before my first day on the job, just so I didn't butcher his name, because it was a sign of respect, right? And so that's something that I think, you know, people can do. Just understand that it will happen, acknowledge that it'll happen, and then correct yourself and move on. And the people around you will see that, even if you're in a group setting, and say, wow, okay, he made a mistake, he fixed it, he moved on, and we can continue on the actual work that we're trying to do. And I want to also add on to what Michelle was talking about, the religious, you know, piece. I had an example that I wanted to share with the group, because you know, there's many different people in our organizations with a lot of different religious backgrounds. And I kind of put it in this context, you know, experiences of, you know, people getting married, right? That's always a big topic in terms of, you know, people committing and having a celebration of a day where they, you know, honor the person they want to spend their life with. If I have a best friend who is a different religious background, or a background that I don't practice, and that's my best friend, do I not go to his wedding because he practices something that I don't practice? You know, do I not go to this Indian wedding because, you know, it's not something that I believe in? No, I go there for the human being, because they're happy and they're having a celebration. So when I think about people in the workplace, I think about it similar. Like, there's no reason why I shouldn't, you know, I can't sit next to someone that has different beliefs. It's just about being able to share, and getting to know them, getting to know where they come from, find the alignments, build something great, but then also respecting that they live in this world and you can still honor them in that world, and vice versa. Would I not go to a Jewish wedding because I'm not Jewish? Different things like that. So I kind of put it in that context where people have a lot of interactions with different types of people, and would you not go to your best friend's wedding because of the religious? Now, it doesn't mean that they're imposing, anything on you. They're just wanting to celebrate and share with you.
So I want to make sure we close out today talking about what it means to be an ally, how important it is. Seth, I'm going to start with you. What do you feel? And I think when we talk about this, we're talking about broad strokes, but at the end of the day, everyone's an individual, regardless of how they would define themselves, describe themselves. I mean, I think the goal at the end of the day is to ask people, how can I be most respectful to you? I think as caring individuals, they say most of the world is good people. We want to be good to other people. We want to be kind. So when we hear a lot, in the DEI world about being an ally. So Seth, what do you feel it means to really be an ally?
Yes, thanks, Talya. And actually, you hit on many of the things that I wanted to chat about with this in your wonderful introduction. But when it comes down to being an ally, I kind of reduce it down to 3 pieces. That it does revolve around engagement and respect, but it's really about listening and really listening, active listening, not just listening passively. It's about understanding, learning. The second piece is learning, being willing to be educated about things that you don't know about. Listening and learning go hand in hand. But then the last piece is that active part. Like you said about passivity, when you listen and you learn, you also need to have follow-up. You need to help support LGBTQ people in things that matter to them, help stand up with them, support them. And what this really comes down to, and I think probably most important in terms of allyship, is that you need to be an ally even when they're not around. Doing actions in front of people is great, but doing actions when they're not there, when they can't see it, is even more important. So if you hear someone say something that's anti-LGBTQ, you need to say something. You need to point out things that are hurtful, help turn whatever happened into a learning lesson for those around you. Because when you think about things from another perspective, like walking a mile in someone else's shoes, it can be a really eye-opening experience and help inform you your own definition of what it means to be an ally.
Well, and I think, we look at so many organizations have, grounding organizational values. So often we see respect. So often we see integrity and accountability. And I think really looking at issues of DEI and looking at how people are individuals, if we're really grounded in our organizational values, we are automatically going to be allies. And it's not only to the people we work with every day, it's to our clients, it's to the people on the street. It's, as we live in the world, to try to be respectful individuals and be allies, just as we want people to be allies for us and how we identify and what our lives are and what's important to us. So I know we have about 5 minutes left. Does anyone have any closing thoughts on today to share? We'll start with Michelle.
Sorry, I had muted myself. No, I mean, I think this was a great panel, and I just think we just have so many different perspectives. And I mean, the one thing I would say is, different people are at different points in the spectrum, and we take people wherever they are and we just help them in their journey. With that, it's very easy to judge people and say, like, why aren't you further along? And I just try and, work with people where they are and bring them closer to the respect that you talked about in the beginning. Just one final thing. I talk about the golden rule and the platinum rule, and then I talk about beyond the platinum rule, which is how do you really know how someone else wants to be treated? So of course the lawyer in me goes, you could ask someone, But if you say, can I hug you? Most people will say, they'll say yes, even though they may not want it. So where I go is, unless you know it's welcome, don't say it or do it. Just a thought.
Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna come back and say, then how do you learn it, right? If we don't want to ask, how do we learn? Where's the balance there? Does anybody else have thoughts on that?
How do you learn in terms of, navigating this space?
Yeah.
I think there's so many more people in our communities that are willing and able to share. I think it's a matter of whether it's a family member, somebody that in your workplace. I think everybody now knows somebody that is part of this community in some form or fashion, right? It's a lot more open now. People are becoming a lot more comfortable. We're a small population by the data, but are we really? I think that people, like I was telling, creating, finding yourself is a very challenging. You go to the bookstore and there's 5 rows of self-help books, right? Like we're all doing this together. And I think when you kind of come back to it, educating yourself is one of the greatest things you can do in your life, and it's always evolving. And I think there's a lot of people in our community, in the AEC industry, that are learners. We have to learn and change every year with the codes, our industry is naturally prone to being learners. So in my opinion, it's just a matter of whether they're willing to, right? Whether it's a son, a daughter, a niece, a grandparent, an aunt, if there's someone close to you or someone that you've grown respect for, that's your opportunity to learn and to engage with them. And not everyone is be willing to share, because they're on their own journey, but at least, having the opportunity to, I think, is something that every ally can easily get to them. And I really do appreciate joining the panel. This was amazing. I learned a lot, from each and every one of you, and I really appreciate, everyone being here today.
Grady and Seth, any quick last thoughts?
Yeah. We've identified the obstacles and the hurdles ahead of us. We just need to continue having these conversations.
I'll echo that. We're very used to sharing stories. It's part of our coming out process. It's part of our just general day-to-day lives. So ask questions, let us help guide, and we hopefully will bring everybody into a more inclusive space.
Thank you so much to the panel. This was such a wonderful discussion, and I love that we're ending on that idea of the elephant in the room. The point is, if we keep talking about this, if we keep bringing it up with people who are willing to talk about it and who are engaged in the discussion, we can just continue to learn more so that we make sure that we create workplaces that are respectful, inclusive, really where people can be happy at work, because happy people do better work. It's just a reality. When we all get along, we can be more productive, more efficient, more innovative, and more creative. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I know everyone involved is willing, including myself, to have further discussions. And I hope you all have a fantastic and wonderful day, wherever you are.
Thanks, everyone. As we said, this was the 3rd in a series of sessions, and we'll be getting back to you about the 4th session, which we anticipate will take place in mid-June, focused on educational outreach as a way to not only increase students' awareness of careers in this industry, but also as a means of increasing diversity in this industry. So stay tuned. We'll be getting back to you with information about that as the program gets developed. Thanks, guys. You did a great job today.
Thanks, Diana. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you.
If the panelists want to stay on the call for just a quick moment, once we close out, that would be appreciated.